Are millennials spoiled babies?
Do millennials stink?
Millennials have it too easy.
Millennials.
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 Blame it on the millennials.
Live from the UK, broadcasting around the world. You're listening to Talking Minaret, discussing matters that affect you, streaming to the world and beyond.
Welcome to Talking Minaret. Got an interesting roundtable discussion for you. It's on the topic of millennials. Got the Abdullahs with me today. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So I think one of the brothers is going to give us an introduction to what the millennials actually are. For some of us, we not really aware of it, but there's been, especially on the media forums, there is a hot topic discussion on the millennials. So one of you guys can explain what the millennials are?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of different things that people kind of interpret millennials as being, but I think the wide kind of consensus of it is that millennials are people who are born approximately between the 1980s and the early 2000s. Typically people who are like young adults at the beginning of their work life. The thing with this generational group of people is that a lot of people in older generations have this continuous sort of narrative that millennials are, kind of lazy, unfocused, and kind of expect everything to be given to them and not need to work for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should probably start off with, I'm glad that you mentioned that. We should probably start off with what people talk about, the bad traits of the millennials, and then maybe you can go to even, I was watching Gordon Ramsay the other day, and he was just cussing down millennials. So it's even in the media and the celebrities, everybody's having a go at the millennials. I've got some thoughts on it, but what do you guys think?
Well, going back to what you said about Gordon Ramsay, he's quite vocal about his thoughts on the millennials. He quotes them as the snowflake millennials. Snowflake is a 2010s derogatory slang term for a person implying that they have an inflated sense of uniqueness, an unwarranted sense of entitlement, or are overly emotional.
Yeah, you guys heard about that? There's that YouTube video on Simon Sinek. He talks about the millennials.
Yeah, he made some interesting points in this, and some I agree with. No, I'd say most I agree with, and there's a couple of things that I'm not too sure about. But he kind of talks about how he thinks that technology and the fact that the way that we are kind of brought up, our surroundings and environment, the older generation think of us millennials in this specific way.
I was watching a video the other day, Arnold Schwarzenegger on YouTube, and he was talking about how back in his day, he pushed himself harder and he did all this kind of stuff, and that, the millennial generation should be doing the exact same thing and they'll get the same exact results and they'll become movie stars or whatever it is. But I just want to touch on, in relation to his generation itself, are we saying the fact that it's the same? Are we currently living in a society that's similar to his generation, or say, I don't know, Gordon Ramsay's generation or whatever it is?
Well, they're quite old. They're probably in like their 50s and 60s. The sort of technological advancements that have been made in sort of the past 20 years or so have made it so that people can do pretty much anything they want really easily and with like minimal effort. Like, for example, if people want to send an email from your phone or complete an application for a job, these things a few decades ago would have meant that you need to physically go out and complete these tasks. And now that almost everything can be done in your hands, might have, a contributing factor to like the difference between our generation and their generation. And the fact that they think that the millennials have a more laid back nature.
Right, okay, so let's move on to talking point number one. Have millennials been dealt a bad hand? ?
So starting off with the first question, have millennials been dealt a bad hand? I have a few opinions on this. Now, my first opinion is the fact that we have been dealt quite a bad hand. Now, there's many examples of this. For example, when you're applying for a job now, for example, if you have just graduated from university and you're looking for a graduate job, and you're applying for a position, and there's one position available at this company that you're applying for, Now, there's probably 10 times more people applying for the same position that the previous generation would have had to compete with. So it's a lot more competition now to get things so simple like a job. There's nowadays education in terms of degrees, in terms of diplomas, have become so common that everyone's basically the same on paper. For example, if you're a pharmacy student and you've just graduated from university and you're applying for a place, a pharmacist, for example, there'll be a lot more pharmacy students now applying for the same job than there would have been 20 years ago. Nowadays, everyone has a degree. There are people out there with degrees that can't find a job. Whereas if you go back 20 years, a degree used to be something that was special. That was something that was a lot more rare. It used to give you a lot more credibility than it does now. So that's just one example. Another example that I can think of at the moment is, for example, housing. At the moment, it's so hard to buy a house for the people in our generation. My parents, for example, bought our house about 13, 14 years ago, and the prices has gone up ridiculously. Like, it's crazy. To buy a house now, it's a lot tougher than it was 20, 15 years ago. So that's just a couple of things that I feel like are contributing factors.
Yeah, to give actual numbers for this example, I have there's someone I know who bought a house about 35 years ago, and that house back then when he bought it was 30,000 £30,000, and then now the same exact house is worth £500,000.
So from this, it sounds like we're saying the fact that it's the societal circumstances. And by the way, as Muslims, we know the fact that good and bad qada is from Allah, and we'll always be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, of course.
It's the fact that I think there's a consistent attack on whatever the millennials or generation Y or Z or whatever you call them after that. People don't want to deal with the actual problem, which is society and the economic system that's been applied upon society. Millennials now, their role models are Kim Kardashian and Kanye West and all these lot. Not really role models, but these are the people that people are getting their work ethic from. And I suppose, I mean, like, even society, you don't have to dig too deep to see the cracks in society, the deprivation of moral values, or the literally subjective reasoning behind making laws that probably benefit some, but then don't benefit other people. I think the elder generation don't want to discuss the real issue, which, in my opinion, I see as society and the system that's implemented on humanity as the problem. To learn stuff, to be academic is one thing, but to have, intelligent people, they're not the people who get really good grades and fancy jobs. I saw a meme the other day actually about this, and you're saying it's the people who have thoughts and are able to apply it to society. Those are the real geniuses of society. And hence, the young Sahaba and all that kind of stuff. Everybody has the capacity for it.
To add on to your point about society and stuff, like the society / environment hasn't prepared millennials and youngers in for their future. Meaning that, like, for example, when employers obviously go to employ people for their company or organization, etc., they haven't been prepared in the right way to best do that, to best be suited in that job. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I think it's obvious to many employers that millennials entering the workforce haven't been prepared for the rigors of employment, even though they're creative, innovative people who want to make the world a better place with their new ideas.
But then, is it because they weren't prepared, or is it that based on one of the brothers mentioned that everybody's got degrees now? I think pretty much a lot of people are prepared, but there's scarcity of jobs, and is that because of the economic system and the susceptibility of the system to booms and crashes, unlike the Islamic system, which wouldn't be susceptible to any of that kind of stuff? I can name you 10 people off my hands easily that have got degrees, but maybe half of them are unemployed.
Struggling to find jobs. Well, if you're going down that way, you like currently you could talk about obviously COVID, and that has impacted on all of this financial aspect.
But for instance, I mean, like for COVID, yeah, fair enough. It has an effect, and it may be the fact that the system in itself is the actual issue in its inability to handle the situation. What I would say to that is this, right? You got a system that the main generator of money, the backbone, the actual backbone of American economics, the backbone of it is the mortgage sector. So what happens when you have a thing like COVID and people lose their jobs and everything like that? And if they lose their jobs, they're not getting any mortgages. And therefore, what happens to that backbone of that economy? So the fact that you got a system that's based on like riba and based on all these financial instruments that are based on riba and all these Islamically illegal things is probably the reason why countries like that are suffering so much. And we probably wouldn't see that so much in an Islamic society.
So, going back to the question, have we been dealt a bad hand? I think it's quite subjective because for us personally, we might think, yeah, we've been dealt a bad hand. I mean, like the things I've mentioned, houses pricing, jobs, etc. But the generation before us could also say they were dealt a bad hand. For example, our background is Asian, yeah. So our parents weren't but the majority of our parents weren't born into this country. So they could say they've been dealt a bad hand in the sense of they came to this country, it was their second language, they had to adapt their whole life, then they had to get somewhere, they had to raise us in a foreign land. So they could say, oh, you guys have it so much better than us, you were born here, you're able to speak the language a lot better, you don't have to adapt to a whole new environment, you don't have to leave your homeland behind. You've got everything on a plate for you, you just have to work hard. I mean, that's what my parents used to say to me all the time. So, I understand their point, but what I think needs to be reiterated is that each generation has their own difficulties and their own trials and tribulations, and it affects people differently, depending on their own personal circumstances.
Yeah, I think the phrase that is kind of on a plate for you is can be a little bit flawed by how the previous generations say that we've all got it on a plate. But I think saying that to the millennials and when we were kids, I think that kind of molds us and shapes us, thinking that okay, we've got a lot of things, so we don't really have to work for much. Some current millennials are actually, they don't work as much as they should do, and they're quite lazy. And I think maybe it could have something to do with the previous and older generations saying these things to us.
I agree, but I think with every generation you get a few bad apples. You know what I mean? With every generation you're gonna have a certain percentage of people that don't work hard, that mess about, that obviously contribute bad towards that the contribution of that generation. So, like some of the older generation, they say to us, "We've put it on a plate for you," but at the same time, they've put it on a plate for us, but our whole generation have been put on a plate for us. Like we're all on the same playing field. Like if, for example, my parents say to me, "We've put it on a plate for you. You just have to work hard." The kid on the other side of the road, if they're in the same situation as me, it's been put on a plate for them as well. So it's not giving us any sort of advantage over other people because they're in the same situation. It goes back to the same thing, like it's competition. Like it's all relative. Back then, they had to work hard. They got degrees. It was more valuable. But now everyone's got degrees because everyone's got it put on their plate. So people have more of a chance to get the degree.
So what you're saying is that we have no leverage as our parents say we do. Is that the point you're trying to make here?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
The competition is getting higher every day. The competition and the toughness of the competition is not decreasing at any rate. And along with that, the the amount of jobs that people are offering and people are getting are lowering as well, which means that everyone in this day and age is slowly struggling to the fact that there's less jobs, and therefore nothing is as black and white as it seems.
Do you guys think, you mentioned that about the job thing? Do you guys think that that's because of the fact that everything's about money now? The materialistic value in actions, yeah, is the most important action. It's not the moral value, it's not the spiritual value, it's the materialistic value. So, in relation to that, people are just out for money, money, money. Expediency. How can I get the money fast? What's expedient for me to get it fast? What, from a business standpoint, if I'm the manager in today's society, if I can get one person to do three people's job, then I'll fire the other two and I'll just make that one person do it. And because there's a job scarcity, then he'll have no choice, or she, whatever, have no choice but to keep doing that job, even if it's three people's worth of work. So is it down to society and the values that it inputs on people, not just economics, but also the values that it puts on people, i.e., cut corners to make money, make as much money, get rich or die trying, that mentality, YOLO, and all this kind of stuff?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it because of that?
yeah, definitely. If you ask all the youth of today, what's your goal in life? Guarantee the things that'll be on the list is going to be a nice house, a nice car, regular holidays, things like they're all materialistic things.
Yeah, I agree. To add to that, this applies for not just these big businesses, but even small businesses. Anyone who is in a position to get more money would nowadays would take it without a blink of an eye. They all they need is the ability to work less and earn more. That's the goal in everyone's life.
I think it's all about balance. Someone can have, for example, if someone famous, a celebrity, is a millionaire and they have a house that has, what, 9, 10 bedrooms and they live alone. Things like that is unnecessary and that's completely materialistic. Whereas if you have a decent house that can that can do its job, obviously you're comfortable enough. That's when the balance is.
But then are we saying that being rich is haram or something?
No, I don't believe so.
No, being rich is not haram. Spending unwisely, obviously, giving more to charity and this and that. That's how. That's sort of where you're supposed to go with it, instead of trying to buy unnecessary things. If you're living alone, there's no point having 5, 6 cars just for yourself. That's where I think. So being rich isn't haram, but spending unwisely and like unnecessarily, that's the downfall.
I agree with that, but I think that stems from people getting carried away, because I feel like people may people who let's say buy 5, 6 cars, they get carried away from the point that they're making money and they want to treat themselves for making that money and earning their own money, and talking about like a 9-bedroom house and stuff, that is excessive in my opinion. But in their eyes, they may think that it's just a reward for their hard work that they've put into their job or whatever it is that they do to make the money.
Well, I mean, like, scholars do talk about hoarding. I know there's been there's hoarding wealth. There's a hadith on that, hoarding wealth, without a specific purpose. So it could be, I'm not giving any fatwas, but probably worth a bit of research on it. But back to the discussion about this discussion came about in relation to the millennial generation not being able to find jobs, and that's primarily because of the society. And one of the reasons what we said is that there's a scarcity in jobs. And I think we one of us, I think I said the fact that because employers now, if they can get one person to do three people's jobs, then they'll do that. And that's largely down to the values in society in relation to heightened materialism money making to the expense of any kind of moral value or anything of the sort. Morally, is it right? But then to them, morality is subjective. Only Islam provides the objective morality. So point two, is the previous generation the real problem? Question mark. Okay, so I'll start this one off. So I'm looking at Urban Dictionary, right? Probably not the best place to get your definitions from, but the baby boomer generation between 1946 to 1964, it gave rise to people like Trump. It gave rise to people like Biden. It gave rise to people like George Bush. I mean, like, it wasn't the millennial or the young generation that launched a war in Iraq, or did even the Gulf War, even that with the Bush Senior, or even the Greater Middle East Initiative, which Bush launched when he started his war on the Muslims. So it wasn't. And in fact, on Urban Dictionary, I read is a funny definition. It says, the boomers, the baby boomers, all they do is complain about the young generation and pretend like it's not their fault. The planet is dying. I think it's meant to be as a joke, but yeah, kinda. We just gotta look at the Trump and what he does on a day-to-day basis, and he's certainly not a millennial or the generation after that. Yeah, so they even now the millennials are not the decision makers. The people in power are not millennials. Boris Johnson's not a millennial.
Yeah, none of the people in power are millennials. Millennials at this point in life are still starting their careers, and that's the oldest millennials. The people of influence are a lot older and part of the previous generations. So the mistakes that are being made today, we're not responsible for, and the mistakes that were made in the past, obviously, we're not responsible for.
I do think the fact that society is the one that, fair enough, from a recruitment perspective, yeah, I don't work in recruitment, but from a recruitment perspective, people avoid millennials because of that reason. One of the brothers mentioned about Simon Sinek and his famous YouTube videos on millennials and how they're not hardworking and all this kind of stuff. I think that's been seeped into society as an excuse to avoid the actual problems in society. Me and one of the brothers trying to say is the fact that is half the policy decision makers on the planet, more than half of them, are they millennials or not? And the answer is they're not millennials. And in fact, what we need to be looking at is possibly the fact that it's a systemic problem, and it's a systematic problem that crosses a whole bunch of thresholds. Mentioned about jobs, just Googling it right now, entry-level position on paralegals now received around 4,000 applications. A trainee accountancy job, around 3,000 applications. Just a standard administrator job, around 2,500 kind of applications for one job. So what does that tell you? And it's not. And if we're gonna talk about society, the sheer deprivation and the sheer removal of the moral values within society in order to chase the materialistic value in society has led to things like in 2018 there was around 6,859 suicides happening. So there's an issue with society, and to blame it just on millennials, I think it's just a scapegoat tactic.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
It's a really good point.
And yeah, there's a technological advancement, I get that, but you don't have to dig deep to see the cracks in society, the misery within society. And that's what millennials are taught to chase with we mentioned, the Kanye West and all these popular figures. We're taught to chase that dream or whatever it is. So going on to the next talking point, what are the millennials doing for the Ummah? Question mark.
Well, I think, like in Islam has given the youth like a high status because of the fact that they can develop and mold the future, and the fact that it's in their hands. So personally, I'm not sure if the millennials are doing as much as we should do, or as much as the previous generations have done. Because if you think about it, Islam is the second largest religion, and it's the fastest growing religion on the planet right now. And it's obviously millennials are less to do with that than the older generations, because of them and the previous generations. The fact that they did all of their hard work, that Islam and the Ummah is in this position today. So I think there is more that we can do. But I'm going to make the point that because of things like technology, like YouTube, TikTok, this and that, there's a lot of opportunity for the youth and the younger adults and the younger generations to put themselves out there and put Islam out there, which I think a lot of people are doing a great job of doing. But I'm just not sure if it can. We're pushing the capacity of doing as much as we can.
Now, I do mainly blame society for this, but so like I said, the millennials at this point in time are quite young, and up until a certain age in your life, society has molded us in a way to think that that is the time of our lives to build our education, establish ourselves. So no matter if you're Muslim, non-Muslim, or whatever, from the age of from when you're born to about 25, 26, the main thing you're doing is establishing your career, focusing on education, etc. So if you're asking the question, what are the millennials doing for the Ummah at the moment? Unfortunately, the majority of them aren't doing very much, because they're focusing on their education, on gaming, on playing sports, or whatever it may be. But that's because of how society has molded us into as a generation. So at this moment in time, I feel like the previous generations, even now, are doing a lot more than the millennials are. But I think this has got a lot more to do with the stages in life that we're in at the moment compared to the older generations.
Is it because the older generation probably taught the millennial generation, oh, make sure you get that degree or get a second
definitely.
degree and get some more money?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a huge factor, because even in the Muslim community, education is still emphasized, and it's made a priority over spreading Islam.
So going off what the brother said about how parents and society makes us prioritize our education first, academically, getting smart and getting a good job. But I believe that a lot of our parents, especially I know mine did, from a young age. I went to a mosque after school every day, so I didn't just get the education I needed for this worldly life. I got it for the hereafter as well. In terms that I was in Hifz class, and every day after school I used to go and I used to memorize the Quran, and after that there was a little session where we'd talk about other affairs as well, other Islamic affairs. So I don't believe that it's fair to just say that we're only in one direction, in the sense that we need to get a good worldly life. But I feel like there are things being done. How said about what's the word? Social media. Although he did say that not many people like millennials are using it for spreading Islam and all of that. But you could say about how the amount of people that are spreading it are growing every day. Even though there's currently not that many, they are still growing. You know what I mean? It's not like just a few people out of however many millennials there are doing it. But
Yeah, I agree. We spoke in a previous podcast about the youth and the very young age of a lot of the Sahabas. that were activists. They spread the word of Islam during their youth, and we can take a lot from them. You know, I think the people nowadays, they might, I don't know if it's because people are scared or people are worried about how people are going to feel about them, but they a lot of the time don't, you know, stick up for their religion, or like if someone speaks bad about it, they don't defend it, and they're not as active vocally about Islam as, you know, how people like the Sahabas were.
Yeah, just adding to the point that the brother said. At the moment, Islamophobia is at its all-time high. Islam is always attacked left, right, center, whether it's on the media or whether it's people on the street, whether it's dirty looks that we get from other people. There's a lot of hate on Islam and on Muslims nowadays. I feel like the millennials, a lot of them are silent on things like this. A lot of people don't have the voice or the courage to stand up for our religion, to stand up for what Islam really means. Like the brother mentioned about the Sahaba, they were very young. Some of them aged 13, 14. I mean, nowadays when you look at a 13 or 14-year-old, you think, oh, he's a kid. What's he going to do? And to think that the Sahaba were that age back then, being actual activists. Now, an activist is someone that actively, you know, spreads the word of Islam, speaks up for Islam, teaches people about Islam. I feel like the millennials need to do a lot more of that. I feel like rather than activism, a lot of millennials are passive in Islam. Like they might do their prayers, they might, you know, go to the mosque for Jummah, things like that. But a lot of them are silent when it comes to important matters. I think we need to be a lot more vocal in terms of defending Islam.
That's interesting. You know, in terms of Islamophobia, and I think Muslims do talk, but the secular attack, the hidden attack on Muslims to change Islam, because if you talk about, say, Sharia or Khilafah, a lot of Muslims, the younger generation, they'll straight away say, "Oh no, that's not part of Islam." They'll be going the defensive straight away. I'm not sure about unifying with all the countries and getting rid of borders, geographical borders, and all this kind of stuff, because based on the Islamic bond of fraternity. So the hidden attack, the secular attack on Muslims, I'd argue that that's the biggest attack on Muslims. The Muslims, whether the millennial or older generation, they're not defending against. I mean, like in relation to the Islamophobic stuff, doesn't Allah say in the Quran that the disbelievers won't stop fighting you until you change your deen? They want you to change your deen, and that's based on the secular attack to remove any kind of sort of notion of Islam and politics, or Islam and economics, or social systems, or whatever it might be. Even I was watching American TV on C-SPAN. They were talking about Islamophobia, and they're electing that new person into the Supreme Court as a new justice, or whatever it is they call it. But they talked about Islamophobia even on the highest levels. But what they don't talk about, and obviously they wouldn't because it's in their interest, is the secular attack on Islam, to change it, to make it a secular deen, like Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism. They're all secular religions. They're trying to reduce Islam down to what a secular religion is. That's the bit that they don't like. And remember, that's the bit that the Quraysh didn't like. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they didn't like that La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. La is a strong no, to say no. No to any other isms. No to anything. No to capitalism. No to secularism. No to Hinduism. Whatever ism it is, it's La, no. And that's what the Quraysh didn't like. They knew what the Prophet ﷺ was bringing. And in fact, when he made the Hijri to Medina, they knew exactly why they needed to stop him, because he was about to take a seat of power in Medina. What I would say is, you know, society in general, because we touched on society. Society is, it's similar to like in like a large pot of water, and depending on the surroundings, it will freeze and turn to ice. If the temperature drops or if the temperature heightens, it will evaporate, whatever it is. So and if you think of the water as the people, whatever's affecting the surroundings of that pot, it will affect the the contents of that pot, just like the temperature rising or decreasing. So the thoughts, and if you think of the contents as individuals, if you change the society, the pot and the surroundings and the effects on that pot, you will automatically change the individual. So the society is the issue. Once society is reformed, the individual will be reformed, and hence the focus of the dawah should be directed towards societies, because the point of at issue is the presence of a corrupt society. And so back to the original point about millennials, are they not just a product of the society? So I'm not totally sure what the baby boomers, such as Trump and Bush and all these lot, they're complaining about. So having said that, my final question, are millennials the problem?
I think kind of I agree with you, but I also think it is millennial.
You have my yes as like if you was to say like as a percentage, what I'd agree to disagree. I would agree with you more than disagree. So
Yeah, same. But I think it's mostly it's like an 80-20. I think even if you think about just a normal young person nowadays, I just think of like someone on their phone lying down in bed or something. Like that's what I think of a lot of the time when I think of just someone, just a student in university or something. If they're at home, that's what I can imagine them doing. I think it's like 80 society, 20 millennials. So.
But then the example of the pot that I gave you and the water in it, the point being, this millennials are the product of society. So technically, isn't it 100% society fault? So from what I'm getting is that you're saying that partially, uh, millennial, they're the problem. And I suppose in a way you can argue it from the perspective of, well, fair enough, society created the mentality of the millennials, not being that laid back individual or whatever it is. However, at the same time, you could probably argue the fact that, well, even if you were entitled like that, you standing up and doing something for your deen is something that's mandated in your deen, so you can't really use, well, society told me to be like that. In fact, weren't there examples of, say, rich prophets previously in the previous ummahs that had entitlement? And in fact, didn't Muhammad SAW have a good status in terms of family lineage and being part of the tribes, the high status tribes? Didn't he have that status and entitlement as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, if you go back to other prophets as well,
Yeah.
Sulaiman alayhi salam, he was a king.
Yeah.
I mean, he was ruling a vast majority of land, but he still did his job as a messenger of Allah. I mean, there are people that have come from really poor backgrounds that were prophets, people that were kings that were prophets. So there's a huge range of people who carried out the message of Islam, regardless of what hand they were dealt. If we as millennials say, "Oh, we were dealt a bad hand," and just use that as an excuse, then I think as a generation we're a failure, because you can always say, "Yeah, we're the product of society," but it's still at the end of the day up to us what we do. We don't have to listen to society. You can be born into a society or a community where murdering is okay, but you should still have the capacity to think with your own brain that murdering is not a good thing to do. So I agree, yes, society has affected us and will continue to affect us in the future. But at the end of the day, we have the capacity, we have the ability to make the difference, no matter what society tells us.
Thanks for joining us this week. Been an interesting discussion. Thanks to the Abdullahs and thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum.